day, and welcome to A Place Called Through. I'm your host, Patricia Wade Goings, the author of Willpower, The Call to Rise Above, available on Amazon. We're broadcasting today from WITV7 Christian Broadcasters Network. We're sharing stories of empowerment, encouragement, and inspiration, all made possible by your charitable donation. So please consider again giving that donation to us at WITV7.org. We're so honored and we're favored today to have with us as our guest, Mr. Chris Powell. He is an independent coach. He is a teacher. He is an educator, and he is a speaker with the John Maxwell team. Welcome to A Place Called Through, Mr. Powell.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor being here. Thank you.
We again say thank you to you and Mr. Powell. Today, we're going to be talking to a heartfelt story today about grief. Grief affects many, many people across the nation, even with today, as we're all facing this horrific pandemic of Corona-19. Some have felt it more than others, but right now it is a universal thing. And so is this topic of grief that we're going to share with Mr. Powell about the loss that he endured, how it affected his family, and how they're surviving and managing to deal with this loss today. Mr. Powell, if you would share with our listeners and our viewers a little bit about yourself, and then we're going to get into your loss, the heartaches and the trials and the tribulations of your going through grief.
Sure. And I'm just plain old Chris, by the way, just plain old Chris. And I'm a retired Navy senior chief. All I did for 23 years is build and train combat teams. I have 3 master's degrees. One of them is in life coaching from Liberty, all of them from Liberty University. I've been knocking around the business world for quite some time. My wife was a nurse for a very long time, and now she's disabled. She had a hip replacement, almost killed her. She now actually right this moment has 6 lung nodules. They're all fortunately benign. She has 2 nodules on her adrenalines, and we don't know about those. So we're in a bit of a transition ourselves, and she is pretty well confined to her chair right now, and I'm her caretaker. Let's see, we have 3 kids. Well, we had 3 children. We have 1 is in heaven now, and the other 2, one's in California and one's in Ohio. We have 4 grandchildren, and we actually moved down here to Fort Mill, South Carolina to be around 2 of the grandchildren after the loss of our daughter. So it's been an interesting few years. It's interesting. John Maxwell says, this too shall pass. Actually, Solomon said that, this too shall pass. And I can tell you, if one's up on the top, when we were in 2010, we were up on the top, this too shall pass. When things are at the very bottom, this too shall pass. I mean, it's just a matter of moving forward one step at a time, isn't it?
And that is very true. In time, it does pass. Grief is not an easy thing to pass over because it's the loss of someone that's close to you, someone that's dear to you, someone that's in your heart that you've carried. It is my understanding that you lost a daughter some years ago. Yeah. If you would highlight us a little bit on that loss.
So this is in 2018. We were up in Lynchburg, Virginia. I was finishing up one of my master's degrees. My wife was looking at possibly going into the DO program, Dr. Osteopathy, but her body just wouldn't allow her to do it. She couldn't do it. So we were up there. We bought a house, living on a lake, kind of nice environment. And our daughter started getting very, very ill. She was down here in Fort Mill, South Carolina, in fact, with her husband and our 2 grandkids. And it was a liver problem, but we believe she had some Hashimoto's disease on top of that. And her liver got so bad, I start getting emotional when I start talking about this, so please forgive me. But she was getting the spider veins on her skin, from her eyes would turn yellow, her skin would turn yellow. And I remember distinctly saying, just looking at her and start crying. And she says, "Daddy, don't cry. Don't cry." She's told me that many, many times. And then it got to a point where she hit her head one day and she started bleeding and they couldn't control it. And they called the ambulance, took her to the emergency room. And then the next day she bled out. We fortunately were able to drive down here for those last few minutes of her life. And, she bled out and my whole world turned upside down at that point. I just basically stopped. I mean, I didn't stop so much as I just couldn't move forward. It gripped me. The grief gripped me. I couldn't blame God because he's my best friend in the whole world. He didn't do it. She actually was behind most of that herself. Okay. She had some underlying conditions, true, but she had some addiction situations. And so we didn't actually know what was going on in the home at the time. Okay. We knew that she was not well. She was emotionally not well. And I'll tell you what she died from. I'll tell you exactly what she died from. She died from the same thing that killed my mother, and that was bitterness. She died from that.
Amazing. We're so sorry for your loss. I want to go back for just a minute because there is a myth out there that people tend to feel that if you don't cry at the loss of someone, your loved ones, that you don't care.
That's not true.
In my study, and because I've lost a child, I lost my firstborn son at the age of 13. He drowned. So I know that, yes, crying is an emotional thing, but to say that you don't cry is to mean that you don't care is so not true. But there is that myth out here that people believe because you don't show that emotion. Can you share with us maybe a little bit on your perspective about that myth?
Yeah, so I didn't cry when she died. I was brokenhearted. I mean, I was right there in the ICU, and when she passed on, I didn't just fall apart and start crying. I was with our grandson at the time, but I will tell you, I wasn't stuffing it either. Okay, I will tell you that when I was doing things, I would actually just start crying. Over 6 months to a year, I would just start crying because the grief was so intense. But, just because, all right, so here's the thing. My father died, I didn't cry. My mother died, I didn't cry. My daughter died, I didn't cry. It has nothing to do with grief at all. But that doesn't mean that it might not come out a little later, because it just might. All right. In my particular case, that's what happened. But the outward show of emotion doesn't mean that you're not grieving inside in a deep level. Okay. It means that you're processing more than anything. You're trying to make sense of everything.
And then in that process of not releasing it, as you said, there was another issue going on there. So your experience with some of the anger yourself, the bitterness, because of those things that were still underlying here. So you had a lot that you still had to process with. And I do know that grieving process, sometimes we get into that fear factor, and you start thinking, well, if I could have, and what could I have done?
Did that. Yeah.
Yeah, that experience of thinking that if it was something that you could have done. And a lot of times, sadly, that when people are grieving, anger happens. Mm-hmm. People become so frustrated until they become solely angry because of this loss. Can you speak to us maybe a little bit about some of that anxiety, the anger, and the what ifs, if I had only?
Yeah, so I'll do the if I had only before, because, I knew there was some things going on there, and I knew that an intervention was needed. But I also knew if that intervention had happened, it would have destroyed the entire family, would have ripped them apart, because people would not have been on board. So it not only would not have been successful, it would have ripped the family apart. It's one of those things where you're sitting back and watching this train wreck, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I had gone back because, all right, so here's the blame game on my end. I spent 23 years in the Navy. I was out to sea half the time. That by itself, which means I wasn't even around to raise the kids most of the time. So I could put that on me and say, well, that's the reason why she was like that is, and what happened is because I am to blame for her when I was out to sea. But that is actually a lie. That is not true. She's the responsible party, and she knew what was right. She knew what was wrong. She got saved at a very young age. She was grown. She was raised in a very powerful Christian home by her mother, and when I was home, by me. So she knew, okay? That did not prevent her from falling into that. And that one was from bitterness because she had a grief, and I won't get too much into that one because that's would not be appropriate for this. But let's just say there was some cheating going on, okay? Mm-hmm. And it just struck her to the core. And from that moment on, it was drinking and all that, and it just killed her. And it was bitterness that did it.
And then what it is just one phase led to another phase that became so horrific, unbearable, and in many cases it was intolerable. It was not acceptable. And that brings me to one point about this grieving process, the acceptance of now what has happened. Yeah. When I lost my son, it was one of the most horrific things to have happened to me. I wasn't here in South Carolina at the time of his passing. I was in New York. And when the call came through to me, it absolutely just ripped me apart. I had a hard time accepting now that I have lost my child. And it lasted for years and years. I was holding on to shirts. I was holding on to different things that belonged to him until I finally got to that point many, many years ago that I had to accept the reality that, yes, he is now gone. And prayerfully one day, as the mother cried out, that one day we will see each other again, as God has told us, so I understand that we go through this process in our grieving, that we're in denial, but then we have to get to a point of acceptance. Yep. And that, I think, is one of the hardest tasks in grieving, is accepting the loss, but accepting the fact that they're really, when God says it's time, it's just time, and there's nothing that we can do. So in your grieving process, even though there were many horrific sides to this, to this loss, you have accepted the reality of it. So now you're at a loss in your family. And I understood you earlier to say that you actually relocated. Was your relocation as a result of this loss or leading into it?
No, it was directly as a result of the loss because our grandkids just had a loss of their mother. So we moved down here to be around the grandkids to support them. Do you need to do something right now?
Oh, no, you're good. Okay. Keep going.
All right. So we relocated down here. Now, getting back to that bitterness, anger part, I never really got angry, which is unusual because, there's stages of grief. And one of them is anger. Okay. I never blamed God. I tried to blame myself, but I couldn't even blame myself because I had nothing to blame. There was nothing to blame. I could have gotten bitter, though. I could have gotten bitter at her for doing that. I could have gotten bitter at God. A lot of people get bitter at God. I never got that far, all right? Because that bitterness and anger is what destroys. What happens is in a grief process, the anger comes in, and that's natural. That's not a problem. Mm-hmm. But then it festers, and the person grabs hold of it and holds it, and that's the problem. Then it starts growing, and it starts permeating everything in that person. You ever been around a really, really negative person? Really negative? Yes. A lot of times they're very bitter.
Yes. Well, Mr. Powell, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back. So to our listeners and our viewers, stay tuned. We'll be right back with Mr. Chris Powell as he shares his story of grief the loss of his loved one, his daughter. Stay tuned. We'll be back with you at a place called Through, broadcasting from WYTV7 Christian Broadcasters Network.
Mr. Happy Living here. I love good things made by good people. That's why I love Casandrino's oil, made from olives soaked in the Grecian sun for months and picked by hand with care. You'll love it too. Grab a bottle today and get 50% off your first subscription order. Shop the World Wide Web at Casandrinos.com. That's KASANDRINOS.com. Use coupon code HAPPYLIVING50 and I'll donate 15% off every order placed during the month of September to WYTV7.
And we're back with Mr. Chris Powell. He's talking to us today on grief, the loss of his loved one, his daughter, the effects of it on his family. You see, grief affects us all in many different ways. Some are in denial. Some just really can't accept the fact that a lost one has been gone. The blame game happens. There's many ways of grieving. So today we're going to continue talking to Mr. Chris Powell about now this transition. He's had to pick up his family and move on to another location to start all over, basically, with the remaining family members and some of the things that they may be still enduring today. So, Mr. Powell, we want to continue, as you said, there are many stages of grief, and we know, we could go on and on about the stages because it's never ending. You go through one phase, you may end up in another one. So we kind of wanted to highlight some more of those phases. I mean, because sometimes there becomes a point where you're almost bargaining. You're trying to find the rationale for, this loss, this grief. And sometimes there's not a way to even get it communicated to other families, because at one point during this grieving process, also it can be conflicted with depression. And so we don't want to not understand depression, but depression does come in from that grieving process. So at this point, you've relocated, with your wife to be with the rest of your family. Can you bring us into that process now that, you've gone through?
Yeah, so we had closure after we moved down here. Our grandkids we came down for our grandkids. They didn't actually come over for about a year. We were right here. We said, why did we even move down here when they're not even going to come around? They finally started warming up and started coming around. And then we got the truth of what was really going on. And it shocked us. We did not realize that she was abusing those kids. She was ripping that family apart step by step. It was part of the addiction. And now all of a sudden it became clear why. Now, a lot of people don't have a why. We know now why the Lord took her home, because had she kept going on that path, the path of destruction was not just in her internally, but throughout the entire family. So we know why, but what about those people that don't know why? What happens with that? You actually talked about that, Pat. I mean, so you know what? Sometimes there's just no why. It just is the way it is. And I can tell you from personal experience, there are several things that I hung on to. One of them was, of course, Scripture. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not onto your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him. He'll direct your paths. Galatians 2:20, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I. Christ lives in me, and the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Those type of things. And music, the deep down music, Casting Crowns music, very deep felt. I'm here, God, help me. God, I don't understand. Please help me, Lord. Come to a point where I can come close to you. And when that was happening, I mean, I can remember, I tear up on songs right now during that era when I was going through that, and I'll hear the song and I'll play them sometimes. You know why? It's a release. It's a therapy. It helps me. It just not helps me remind me of her and the pain, but it helps me come through that because I do know one thing: if one stuffs the emotions, it will come out sooner or later.
And that is very true. I can recall, during the time when I lost my husband, one of the things that the nurses and the social workers kept saying to me was that I had to take care of myself, because I got to a point where I was neglecting Pat. I just didn't want to do anything for me. My primary focus was, on my husband at that time, that I needed to make sure that he was okay. The fear factor began to kick in for me, because I didn't want to lose my husband, because we had only been married for a short period of time. Then I became very bitter, because this was now happening to me, and I absolutely had no idea what I was going to do. But the one thing that really kind of just kicked me in my face and said, get up, let's rise above this, was my belief, knowing that the Word of God says that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And so as I began to turn back to Christ, not that I was away, but my focus was not there. And so when I began to get focused, knowing that God was what he is, a way maker, then things kind of, got a little bit smoother there, even though that pain is always there. But the one thing that you had mentioned, Mr. Powell, was about faith. So in this walk that we call it, this journey of grief, the one thing that we have to remain strong is in our faith, knowing that even though it's painful, it hurts, of course, because no one wants to see their loved ones, leave the earth. You always want to hold on to them with all that you can. And so when that time does come, your faith is truly the test even more so. So the faith that you have and the faith with your family, how has that changed since now, time has passed on?
And it's interesting you say, how has that changed? And it has changed. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen in Hebrews. And my personality actually changed. I also am a behavioral analyst, and so I took my own tests, and my actual personality shifted. You know what happened? The way I worship shifted as well. It's interesting because before I was way much more out there, very, very expressive in my faith. And now I'm much more internal, much more. Don't be surprised if that doesn't happen to you, because that's part of the process and that's, what? God is actually, here's the process actually. God is actually molding me, molding you, and shaping you into his image. And as he does that, that's a very painful thing at times. And sometimes, I'm not saying that there's loss to just do that. I'm just saying that that's part of the big picture. And the big picture perspective is so important in this. It's not the why, but Lord, it's yours. I surrender. That's where it's at.
Yeah, and like I said, faith, it means everything. Not only in just grief, in everyday living. Your test of faith. You have to have this faith. You have to believe, first of all. My thing was I had to believe in myself that I could rise above this. And until I got it to that point that I could believe, I couldn't convince anybody else in my family that this too shall pass. Yeah. Because I had to believe that, yes, that this would pass. We're unfortunately running out of some time here, but I really want you to share with us, any final thoughts, anything that, you feel will help to inspire and empower someone else that may be going through this grieving process. And I know that we talked a lot about your situation. Can you also, in your concluding, bring us into depression and some of those little symptoms, because some of the symptoms in depression affect us in a physical way, not always in a mental way.
Yeah. So the depression is going to come in one form or another. And I will tell you that the faith is going to bring you out of the depression. Now, what a lot of people make the mistake of is that they isolate themselves. They sequester themselves. They don't reach out to other people. They don't allow other people in. That is a huge mistake, because other people are what God is using to help you. You'll see this where he's gathering a support group around you. No, it doesn't have to be church. It can be a support group. They have to be on your side, of course. but they have to be watching your back. They have to be in your best interest. But those people, it is so crucial to be around people that will support you. Absolutely. Please do not isolate yourself. That will drive the depression much deeper and it'll last a lot longer if it even goes away. Okay. What's going to pull you out of that depression are those other people. The Holy Spirit will, God will, but they're not flesh and blood. They're spirit.
Yeah.
The flesh and blood humans and the spiritual aspects of community is what's going to lift you up. It's not you doing it yourself. You won't. Leave it from me. You will not do it yourself.
Absolutely. No, you do have to believe, and you do have to reach out and let other people help you. You know, I finally got to that point where, okay, I could allow other people to come in. And I was so delighted. You know, at first there was that wall of resistance because I felt, oh, they just are looking for this, looking for that. But then when I realized, you know, you really do need somebody. Help is here. And I think that a lot of times in the grieving, it becomes so overwhelming. We do tend to shut others out. And in actuality, we never know who God sends in our path to help us out. He's always with us. He promised he would never leave us nor forsake us. So he has his angels that he does dispatch. And it's up to us to believe in him and take it by the helm and trust in him. As the woman that walked around with those issues of blood for many, many years, the only thing she wanted to do, she said, if I could but just touch the hem. So I say to those that may be going through grieving, if you're even fighting the battle of depression today, reach out for the hem. The helm is available to you. Thank you, Mr. Chris. If you have any resources or a phone number, someone wants to reach out to you.
Yeah.
How can they reach out to us? Give us
that. Really easy. My phone number is 803-288-7164. That's 803-288-7164. My email is chris@powelladvisory.com. Chris@Powell, POWELLADVISORY.com. And that's where we can connect and we can talk. And I'm a coach. I'm a corporate trainer. I'm a pastoral counselor. I've got I'm bald. So
God bless you, Mr. Powell. It has been truly delighted to have you on my guest today on A Place Called Through. We certainly invite you to come back at another time and maybe share some more stories with us, such as what you've done today. And if you have any more training, any insights, any resources, please give us that call back, Mr. Powell, so that we can get you back on again.
Sure.
At A Place Called Through. I've been your host today, Patricia Wade Goings. I am also the author of Willpower, the Call to Rise Above. That book is now available on Amazon. So I encourage you, get the book and learn how to rise above. I've overcome many battles and many struggles. Again, I am Patricia Wade Goings, and we're broadcasting from WYTV7 Christian Broadcasters Network, where our mission is to empower, encourage, and to inspire others. Don't forget, make that charitable donation to help us continue our mission of hope. You can reach out to me at pgoingswp@gmail.com, also in area code of 843-608-9744. Follow me on WYTV7.org and on Facebook at A Place Called Through, at Willpower, the Call to Rise Above. God bless you. Have a wonderful evening.